at the most picturesque spot in Himachal Pradesh, Kasauli, at the rooftop of the luxury hotel Ramada. Hi, this is Shihan Hussaini, Director Coaches Committee, Archery Association of India. Your mind coach. You are watching the series of lectures on mental training. Om, 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 Olympic medal, nothing but the Olympic medal. Welcome again to discover the mind coach in you. Namaste, namaskar. Welcome to Aap Hai Next Dronacharya. Man ka Dronacharya. Chalo tirandaz mein Olympic gold लाएंगे, जरूर लाएंगे, chalo. In this lecture, the seventh in the mind coaching series, we will discuss a very important topic, stress management in archery competitions. One of the most studied and frequently cited areas within the field of applied sports psychology is that of competition stress and anxiety. This prominence is undoubtedly linked to the stressful nature of elite sport of archery and the demands associated with the competitive environments that surround the modern day archer. As a direct consequence, a core component within many archers' competitive preparation programs includes some form of stress management focused on the achievement of an optimal pre-performance mental state. This lecture, which contains 6 sections, attempts to explore these programs and provides an insight into treatment framework that underpin practical work with elite archers. Section number 1. In the opening section, I'll clarify and place into context the key terms used within this area and outline their importance for applied practical work. Section number 2. The second section provides an overview of the stressor, that is, demands that archers commonly encounter, and illustrates the type of anxiety responses archers may experience following exposure to these demands. Section number 3. In the third section of this lecture, I'll summarize contemporary thinking on how sports psychologists believe anxiety can affect archery performance, and also illustrate how mind coaches and mental trainers may attempt to evaluate the archer before recommending an intervention strategy. Section number 4. In the fourth section, I will provide an overview of stress management interventions in elite archery that have been designed to reduce the intensity of anxiety symptoms that archers commonly encounter in stressful situations. Section number 5. In section number 5, I will detail an approach to combating stress that focuses on programs that are designed to restructure the archer's interpretations of anxiety symptoms from negative to positive. Finally, sixth section. In the concluding section, I shall highlight the treatment approaches with 2 case study scenarios. Let's start with the first section in this amazing picturesque place, clarification and contextualization of key terms. The use of stress management within the area of competition stress and anxiety has often been hindered by lack of consistency and at times understanding of the central terms adopted within the literature available. I do not intend to provide an in-depth debate on these issues as has occurred in some recent sports psychology interpretations. Instead, certain terms are defined and contextualized to encourage a clearer understanding of how to manage archers' responses in pressure situations. The primary aim of this lecture: contemporary thinking views stress as a dynamic relationship between archers and their practice and competition environment. Specifically, performers appraise the demands of the situation and then attempt to cope with these demands. Inherent within this approach is the perspective that archers will encounter many different demands that tax their resources, and it is the archer's perceived ability to cope with these that form the process of stress. If archers feel that they cannot cope with the demands, they are then likely to experience different levels of competition anxiety. The role of appraisal within the process of stress is central to the context of determining the most appropriate stress management intervention, specifically the reduction approach to stress management that suggests that elite archers react to the demands with negative performance consequences. This point was emphasized by one of my archers, Mahima Prajapati, from another state, in fact a small union territory called Daman, who did not know the local language of my state, Tamil Nadu. When she talked about her background and approach to her practice beginnings here, she said, and I quote her, "There are problems with coming from a small union territory. We have never had a compound archer in my territory at this level before. So I'm doing something that has never been done before. I joined a team of archery girls here in my college who did not understand my language and I did not understand theirs. With them, if I showed fear or timidity, I would have been in trouble. Archery practice was no different. If I came to the archery field showing fear and nerves, everyone will pick on me. My self-esteem and confidence would have gone. I just had to be confident and relax. Relaxation was very, very important to me." The content of this quote helps illustrate one of the treatment frameworks and supports one school of thought in relation to the negative influence that anxiety responses can have on archery performance. Specifically, when Mahima talks about the importance of attaining a relaxed state to help cope with pressure, her thinking is aligned with the reduced treatment framework, that is, striving to lower the intensity levels of anxiety symptoms and archery experiences. However, an alternative understanding of the stress processes suggests that certain archers possess the ability to respond to the demands of competitive performance and their anxiety symptoms in a positive way. The following quote from one of the most successful Korean archers in Olympic history, An-san, helps in this respect. "For me," she says, "Tokyo was a dream. As a kid, all that I wanted ever was to do to shoot in the Olympic Games. And my ultimate dream was to win an Olympic medal, and I was able to achieve that in Tokyo. I guess there was always a lot of attention on me, a lot of expectations on me to perform well, and if you turn those into a positive thing, it becomes support. Whereas if you turn it into a negative thing, it then becomes pressure." An-san's sentiments help show that the second treatment framework presented in this lecture that suggests experiencing anxiety symptoms does not always have a negative effect on performance. Specifically, when archer An-san talks about turning expectation and pressure into a positive way for performance, her thinking is aligned with the restructuring treatment approach adopted within contemporary stress management program. That is, striving to interpret anxiety symptoms in a positive way. Several research studies in applied sports psychology have examined the different stressors or demands that archers may have to deal with in stressful situations. The available literature suggests that aspects of competition, example, thinking about performance, the goals that may have been set, and perceived levels of physical and mental preparation, interpersonal relationships, example, expectations from teammates, coaches, sponsors, family members, financial matters, example, funding issues of sponsors, traumatic experiences, example, the risk and consequence of injury, and the weather and environmental conditions can result in archers having different anxiety responses. An important distinction to make at this stage is the separation of anxiety into cognitive and somatic symptoms. So far, the term anxiety has been used in a global way to describe how archers respond to the demands within stressful situations. It is important to realize, however, that coaches and psychologists should distinguish between archers' mental and perceived physical responses to the stressors they encounter. Specifically, cognitive anxiety responses are the thoughts archers experience in stressful situations, such as worries and negative expectations about performance. That is, archers' mental response to stressors. However, somatic responses are the archers' perceptions of the physiological arousal state in stressful environments. That is, archers' perceived physical response to stresses. Symptoms categorized as somatic include muscular tensions, butterflies in the stomachs, increased heart rate, and perspiration. I'm going to highlight why this distinction is important in the context of stress management interventions, specifically the notion that within certain approaches, these differing mental and physical symptoms require specific and individual psychological skill programs to be most effective. This feature applies to both the reduction and restructure framework. For example, within the reduction approach, an archer who experiences high physical anxieties would usually be provided with a somatic, that is, physical relaxation treatment such as progressive muscle relaxation in an attempt to align the treatment to the physical response. Within the restructure approach, archers interpreting their mental anxieties as negative for performance would often be provided with a cognitive, that is, mental treatment strategy such as imagery or cognitive restructuring in an attempt to match the treatment to the specific response of the archer. A final consideration that has a bearing for the mind coach when treating the effects of stress in the activation levels required to perform optimally. In this instance, activation refers to the appropriate mental and physical state that archers need to be ready to perform. Perhaps the most effective way to illustrate this point is to consider the levels of activation required in two different tasks. For example, the desirable mental and physical state to demonstrate readiness to perform as an Olympic weightlifter is very different from the state of readiness needed to perform well as an Olympic archer. For example, strength, power, and aggression are key determinants of performance with the gross muscular activity of weightlifting, whereas composure, control, and calmness are key factors within the fine muscular control event of archery. It is clear that the two appropriate activation states fall at different ends of a continuum and that practitioners should consider these issues before interventions designing. The relationship between anxiety and sports performance. Many different explanations have been forwarded in research that attempts to account for the relationship between anxiety and performance. One approach is that increases in competition anxiety and particularly cognitive symptoms always have a detrimental effect on performance. This is the underpinning premise for the reduction approach to managing stress. Other researchers have suggested that the relationship with the performance should be determined at a more individual level than that archers possess optimal levels or zones of anxiety within which the performance will be maximized. These assertions lead to interventions being individually tailored where at certain times reduction would be called for if the archer was too anxious. But on other occasions, the mind coach may consider increasing anxiety levels to perform an energizing function. A third perspective is based on the principle that high levels of anxiety may be interpreted in a positive way and actually benefit sport performance. This notion links closely to the underlying message that I quoted earlier and is fundamental to the restructuring approach. Now let's go to the fourth part of this lecture, how to assess anxiety symptoms. Prior to mental trainers providing any form of intervention to archers, an accurate assessment of the archer's anxiety symptom should take place. To do this, mind coaches typically adopt a combined approach to see how mentally and physically anxious archers may be and whether they interpret the anxiety symptoms experienced as positive or negative towards performance. This assessment often uses a combination of validated psychometric questionnaires alongside interviewing procedures with the archers in question and their coaches. Mental trainers may also ask archers to record the anxiety symptoms in some form of diary, and finally may observe their behavior in stressful situations. Mind coaches and mental trainers then collate and analyze this information and come to a conclusion about the intensity levels of mental and physical anxiety symptoms and whether these are interpreted in a positive or negative manner towards performance. This information then underpins the agreed treatment framework for the archer. Let's now move to section 5, a reduction approach to stress management intervention. As mentioned earlier, one approach to stress management adopts techniques that are designed to reduce competitive anxiety symptoms. In line with the distinction between the different cognitive and somatic anxiety symptoms, the treatment program that are prescribed under the reduction approach can be broadly categorized into mental skills and physical skills. Although general in nature, it should be noted that this distinction has arisen from several groups of sports psychologists suggesting that the anxiety treatments they provide should target or match the dominant anxiety symptoms that the archer experiences in a stressful encounter. To illustrate this treatment, perspective suggests that if the archer's dominant anxiety response is somatic in nature, that is, the intensity of the physical anxieties is higher than the mental symptoms, then the treatment the mind coach should advise is a skill focused mainly on reducing somatic symptoms, with less regard given to the cognitive symptoms experienced. Conversely, if the dominant anxiety response is a symptom associated with cognitive anxiety, a mental approach with less regard given to the treatment of any physical anxiety symptoms would be advocated. The skills outlined next are examples of techniques that would fit into this treatment framework. And using the matching approach, coaches or mental trainers would select a treatment based on the archer's dominant anxiety responses. I will now detail the physical relaxation skills, mental relaxation skills, and thought controlling techniques used under the umbrella of reduction approach. These skills are described as a series of logical and progressive steps and are supplemented by a practical example in the form of a case study at the end of this lecture. They help archers acquire the skills in question. A common learning framework is regularly adopted by mental trainers and mind coaches. Briefly, the skills detailed here and in subsequent sections of the lecture can be acquired through the following phases. First, the archer learns the fundamentals of the skill in a stress-free environment, working closely with the mind coach. Second, increasing independence from the mind coach, the archer becomes more self-directed and begins to apply the skill in non-threatening situations. Third, the archer is instructed to use and also test the efficacy of the skill in a non-sporting, stressful environment. The final stage of learning and acquiring the skill involves the archer applying the skills in increasingly demanding situations like practice, warm-up, and fully competitive events. Probably the most common application of a physical relaxation technique used to reduce archers' somatic anxiety symptoms is the collection of mental skills grouped under the rubric of progressive muscle relaxation techniques. Although these skills exist in several different forms, the most common enables performers or the archers to learn the skill of physical relaxation techniques through a series of logical, progressive stages. The primary goal is for archers to reach an end point where the skill and thus a relaxed physical state can be attained very rapidly in practically any stressful situation. Traditionally, when learning the skill, archers will advance to different stages where the amount of time it takes to achieve a relaxed state progressively decreases. During the preliminary stage of learning the skill, archers are required to systematically focus their attention on different gross muscle groups within the body, consciously tensing and relaxing to increase self-awareness of the difference between a tensed, anxious state and a relaxed, less anxious one. To supplement this process, archers will usually be provided with some form of audio track that contains a set of instructions that methodically guides them through the muscle groups of their body. As with all the stages of the program, archers will not progress to the next stage until they are proficient in the technique. Specifically, a constant and desirable state of physical relaxation needs to be achieved before the archer can move on. During the second stage of the program, the audio track is removed and the archer is asked to simply relax the gross muscle groups used in the previous stage rather than tense and relax. Once proficient, archers can progress on to the third stage, where they focus on some form of a cue that acts as an association trigger to help invoke the relaxed stage. The trigger can adopt several forms. For example, based on preference, archers may condition the response through self-talk in the form of cue words such as relax, relax. Alternatively, they may use a physical action such as gripping the handle of the bow. Finally, they may incorporate a trigger conditioned to the exhalation phase of the breathing. The fourth stage of the process strives to make the skill portable and shift its use into more realistic settings. Archers are taught to avoid tensing the muscles that are not involved in a particular movement and actively relax those that are involved in the activity during the time prior to the movement. Up to this point, archers will have tended to hone the relaxation skills in completely non-threatening environments that are usually quiet, familiar, and comfortable. During the penultimate stage of learning the skill, archers are taught to integrate the technique into naturally occurring semi-stressful environments away from the competition arena. This process requires archers to take 2 to 3 deep breaths, focusing on the conditioned trigger during the exhalation phase of breathing to gain an associated level of physical relaxation. Examples of where this technique may be practiced include queuing while shopping, when running late for a social event, or when stuck in traffic while driving. The final stage of the process involves application training, whereby the archers practice their technique in progressively stressful sporting environments. The final stage usually takes place gradually over a period of time to refine the skill in intense sporting situations. In comparison to physical relaxation, mental relaxation techniques have received far less exposure as treatment approaches to reduce archers' mental anxiety symptoms in the research literature that is available. Practitioners or mind coaches have tended to focus on alternative cognitive strategies outside of those categorized as relaxation to reduce intensity levels of cognitive anxiety. However, transcendental meditation, TM, or Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, has been used as a mental relaxation technique with archers. I studied under Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. This approach essentially adopts a cognitive-based framework with the underlying treatment target being more closely aligned with the mental anxiety symptoms experienced. Mind coaches have once again tended to adopt a progressive learning approach to the skill of meditation in line with the frameworks designed for physical relaxation. The goal of this approach focuses upon the learning the skill of cognitive relaxation through a series of steps designed to transcend the mental state of the archer from one of being mentally anxious to one of being mentally calm. Traditionally, when learning the meditative skill, archers progress through 4 stages to reach an end point where they can lower their levels of mental anxiety in a matter of seconds. The first stage involves archers learning a general meditative technique that establishes a focus on breathing. Archers are asked to introduce a mantra on each breath out, and once relaxed, count down from 10 to 1 on each exhalation, and then upwards from 1 to 7 on each inhalation. The goal here is for archers to transcend down to a deeper level of cognitive relaxation and then actively shift back up to raise the level of consciousness. To supplement this process, archers are often provided with an audio track that contains relaxing music and an instructional set outlining the process described earlier. In the second stage, archers are supplied with a second audio track that contains instruction but no relaxation music. The directions ask archers to focus on the mantra, and the counting procedure is subsequently reduced from 5 to 1 on exhalation and then from 1 to 3 on inhalation to shorten the time it takes to achieve mental relaxation. Next, in the third stage, the audio track is removed altogether, and the archers are instructed to discard all counting procedures. Archers are then asked to concentrate on inhalation and repeat the mantra phrase on every exhalation. During this stage, archers are also asked to transfer the skill into more realistic, stressful settings, but away from archery, to reduce the mental anxieties experienced in these situations. The final stage of learning the meditative skill involves application training for the archer, where archers are asked to integrate the meditative skill into progressively stressful archery environments. Other mental relaxation techniques to treat cognitive anxiety include calming mental imagery and autogenic training. Based on the proviso that an archer has been trained in the use of imagery, calming imagery can be used to help reduce cognitive anxiety. When using this technique, the mind coaches commonly ask the archers to imagine being in a relaxing environment, such as on a warm beach with the sound of the waves lapping the shore, or lying in a field on a pleasant summer's day. Essentially, mind coaches should advocate whatever images archers personally believe will provide them with a sense of calmness and mental relaxation. Autogenic training is fundamentally a self-styled hypnosis strategy that mental trainers can use to help produce the two physical sensations of warmth and heaviness. The process occurs through 6 stages. In the first stage, archers use self-dialogue. Example, my right arm is heavy, and focus their attention on the heavy feeling. Archers then cancel this effect by physically moving the arm while focusing on the breathing. This process is then repeated across other body segments until the sensation of heaviness can be achieved through the entire body. The second stage of the process replicates the first, except the goal is to achieve a warmth sensation in the limbs and body rather than a feeling of heaviness. The two processes of achieving these sensations are then combined so that the archer can accomplish a warm and heavy sensation simultaneously. The third stage aims to regulate the archer's heart rate through using a verbal suggestion such as my heart rate is regular and calm, which is then added to the process of achieving a warm and heavy sensation. The fourth stage links these procedures to breathing rate, and the fifth stage associates these processes to the regulation of the visceral organs through a focus on the solar plexus. Finally, the sixth stage asks archers to focus on the strategy of placing a cool cloth on the forehead to experience a cool sensation. Once all 6 stages are complete, archers practice the entire sequence all the way through using a verbal citation or a mantra that combines each individual stage to lower cognitive anxiety. One limitation with autogenic training, however, is the length of the time mind coaches suggests it takes to acquire and become proficient in the skills to achieve strong and profound sensations. Specifically, reports have indicated that it may take up to 6 months to become adept in autogenic training, even when practicing the skill on a daily basis. Alternative techniques to reduce cognitive anxiety that fall outside the classification of relaxation skills include the use of thought control techniques such as thought stopping or positive thought control. Traditionally, thought stopping involves having archers keep a diary of the anxious thoughts they experience prior to or during performance that they consider negative and intrusive to their preparation and performance. Archers are then instructed to identify a trigger word such as stop or no to act as a technique to block the negative thoughts. Self-talk and internal dialogue is advised to be used as means for archers to execute this approach. Caution is, however, advised with using this technique without considerable expertise because of the potentially deleterious effects of attempting to suppress anxious thoughts with the unintended effect of being the literal opposite. The cognitive skill of positive thought control should be seen as an extension to the thought-stopping process. Specifically, rather than ending the process with the reciting of a blocking trigger word, archers are instructed to replace the negative thought with a positive one to develop a more positive psychological orientation. Traditionally, archers use a diary method supplementary to those used to record negative thoughts, where they are encouraged to construct positive self-dialogue statements to replace each negative thought experienced. Therefore, the full process of positive thought control requires archers to first identify any negative thoughts experienced, block the thought using a thought-stopping trigger word, and then finally replace the negative thought with a positive thought to create a positive cognitive orientation. A summary of the psychological skills presented so far aligns with a singular approach outlined in the introductory statement within this lecture of mine. Essentially, this approach advocates the use of these individual psychological skills as discrete treatment frameworks in line with the archer's dominant anxiety response, mental or physical. However, for archery, psychologists often recommend the use of combined mental and physical treatment packages. As such, mind coaches and archers are advised to select individualized combinations of mental and physical strategies in an attempt to treat the full range of anxiety symptoms archers experience within the stressful encounter. It is important to note that the goal of these combined or integrated frameworks would still be focused on archers reducing the intensity levels of anxiety symptoms. This raises an obvious issue in relation to the appropriate activation states required for certain sporting tasks. In particular, it is not always appropriate to focus solely on techniques designed to reduce competition anxiety symptoms. Indeed, the example given in the introduction helps illustrate this point. For the weightlifter, a reduction in both physical and mental anxieties may not be an appropriate strategy to create the best activation state for performance. An intervention approach based on this philosophy will potentially interfere with the suitable activation states required for optimal performance. In a sense, therefore, the archer may become too mentally or physically relaxed to perform. Consequently, some archers may require either generally or prior to certain specific tasks an increase in anxiety levels to create the optimum activation state to enter the competitive arena. Several energizing techniques have been proposed to serve this function when archers require increased activation. Traditionally, these techniques are introduced after those skills designed to reduce anxiety symptoms because they are considered as more complex derivatives of the psychological skills. Essentially, mind coaches can reverse the focus of several of the skills outlined in the reduction approach and use them in an energizing way rather than a relaxing way. For example, breathing exercises can be just as effective as producing an energized state as they are as a calming one. When teaching these skills, mind coaches first ask the performers to use their breathing control techniques to gain a relaxed state. Following achievement of this state, archers are asked to consciously increase their breathing rate and imagine that with each inhalation and exhalation that they are increasing their energy levels and reaching an optimum activation state. This breathing technique is usually combined with self-talk cues. For example, archers might be advised to use a cue word such as energy up on inhalation, Additional techniques that mental trainers can prescribe to increase activation levels involve the use of imagery-based skills. However, rather than using these in a calming function as outlined previously, the skills will be used as an energizing function. Specifically, mind coaches ask archers to imagine scenes that depict the creation of energy. Examples of images of these sort include images of trains moving slowly, gaining momentum and then speed. Images of heavy machinery where working parts move rapidly. Images of natural forces such as powerful waves and winds, and images of animals sprinting and moving rapidly. Finally, rather than using self-talk skills with cue words associated with a relaxed state, this technique can also be applied in an energizing function. The content of the verbal dialogue is all that needs to change for archers here. And mental trainers would advocate the use of words such as explode, charge, and power to help facilitate the process of energizing the archer's pre-performance activation level. Unless the activation demands of the task are considered, the approach of generalizing treatments across archery may be problematic. The need to consider this issue is a key part of restructuring approach to stress management interventions outlined next. Specifically, sports psychologists may adopt a more individualized approach to the treatment of anxiety, with the realization that advocating a general reduction or activation approach may not be appropriate for the demands of some archery tasks. The philosophy underpinning the restructuring approach suggests that rather than attempt to alter the level of amount of anxiety symptoms, it is more beneficial for mind coaches to focus on the archer's appraisals or interpretations of these symptoms. In particular, experiencing symptoms of competitive anxiety is considered a natural process in elite archery, in which cognitive anxiety slightly signify the importance of the event and help to simulate the levels of effort needed to perform well. And somatic anxieties indicate a physical readiness to perform at a high level. Essentially, mind coaches prescribe a range of psychological techniques that, when executed proficiently, allows archers to gain control over the anxiety symptoms, enabling the archers to restructure and interpret anxiety, mental and physical, as helpful or positive for optimal performance. In this approach, practitioners essentially prescribe a psychological skill program that not only treats the competitive anxiety symptoms experienced by the elite archers, but also considers the activation demands of the tasks in their sports environment. A restructuring approach to stress management intervention. The final remarks of the last section provide an applied rationale for adopting the restructuring approach in the development of stress management interventions for elite archery. It is also important, however, to provide a brief insight into the research that underpins the evidence base for the development of this approach. In addition to the applied reasoning, the restructuring approach has emerged as a direct consequence of developments in the research literature on competition, stress, anxiety, and archery performance. Specifically, over the past 15 years, this research has consistently identified that certain archers have the ability or have learned over time certain skills that enable them to interpret the anxiety symptoms as positive towards performance, whereas other archers interpret the anxiety symptoms as negative. Studies have also suggested some important individual attributes that are related to the ability to interpret anxiety symptoms as positive towards performance. For example, archers who view their competitive anxiety symptoms as more positive towards performance demonstrate better overall performance standards, are higher in skill level, feel more in control, exhibit higher levels of self-confidence, demonstrate a more resilient personality, and are more experienced and more highly competitive when compared to archers who interpret the anxiety symptoms as more negative towards performance. Given this association with positive performance and desirable personal qualities, applied researchers have sought to explore and identify the factors that enable archers to achieve a positive interpretation of the competitive anxiety symptoms. This research has been undertaken with the explicit aim of informing the structure and content of possible stress management programs and has helped construct the interventions used within the restructuring approach. Recent studies with elite archers have shown that elevated anxiety symptoms are not necessarily debilitative towards performance, and therefore techniques designed to alter the levels of anxiety may not be appropriate for the activation demands of certain sports. Example, weightlifting, explosive track events. Further, archers with a positive interpretation of the anxiety symptoms have consistently suggested that it is the application of strategies that help them appraise the symptoms in a positive way that are most valuable to their performance preparation. The most important psychological strategies involved in this approach are self-regulatory skills that provide archers with a sense of perceived control over the environment and themselves, and enable them to maintain a high level of confidence that protects against negative anxiety interpretations. These strategies include cognitive restructuring and rationalization of anxiety symptoms through the use of self-talk, goal-setting practices that provide archers with a level of control over the situation, and mental imagery that emphasizes control over the emotional state and depicts mastery of skills and performance. The next sections is going to provide overviews of each of these psychological skills that now indicate how they can be applied to help archers foster more positive interpretations of anxiety symptoms. Although essentially cognitive skills, the restructuring and rationalization of symptoms can be applied to help archers cope with mental and physical anxiety. These skills are underpinned through the use of self-talk and variations of approaches from cognitive, rational, emotive, behavioral therapy in the field of clinical psychology. Use of these skills is based on the premise that archers experience and appraise situations that lead to beliefs that are either rational, that is positive interpretation of anxiety symptoms, or irrational, that is negative interpretation of anxiety symptoms. Rational beliefs lead to functional, that is beneficial consequences for performance, whereas irrational beliefs lead to dysfunctional, harmful consequences for performance. The application of these skills provide archers with a framework to question the interpretation of the negative symptoms and turn them around to form a positive interpretation, thereby creating beliefs that lead to functional consequences for performance. Traditionally, when learning the skills, archers are taken through three progressive stages that focus on identifying, disputing, and then replacing the negative interpretations of anxiety symptoms. First, mental trainers ask archers to keep a diary of the negative mental and physical anxiety symptoms they experience. The archers are then asked to identify that the symptoms are indeed irrational and will have a negative impact upon their preparation and performance. To achieve this, archers apply the following questions to the symptoms they experience. Is my appraisal based on fact? Does my appraisal help me achieve my archery goals? And does my appraisal help me feel positive about my upcoming archery performance in the next competition? If the archers answers no to these questions, then they are asked to question this initial appraisal and provide examples of how these interpretations can be disputed. An example of a thought process that would require disputing comes from the following extract from an interview with an elite archery player that I had. And the archer says it is a combination of mental and physical things that they all come together. The worries make me stale on the physical side. I feel very tense and in a rut. It becomes a completely negative thing and a completely negative feeling. I get anxious and worried, and it is a distraction to me. A massive distraction. This quote highlights the thought process that leads to a negative interpretation of pre-competition anxiety and a situation where experiencing these symptoms is viewed as harmful for the preparation and performance. Here, mind coaches would educate performers to dispute this irrational appraisal and replace it with a rationalized or restructured thought process, thereby creating a positive anxiety interpretation for performance. Continuing the example, the archers would be educated to change the appraisal of the anxiety symptoms by questioning whether tension and worry are always detrimental to performance. The archers will be asked to replace these thoughts with the ones suggesting that the worries they experience highlight the personal importance of the event and create an importance that equates to the increased effort and a more focused and concentrated state. Finally, archers are educated to consider that the physical symptom they are experiencing actually indicate a level of physical preparedness for the task in hand and a readiness to physically perform optimally. Initially, the application of these skills can be very, very challenging, and it is advised that archers progress through the stages with a high degree of conscious thought and reliance on a suitably trained mental trainer. Tapes, diaries, and scripts are often used to assist and educate the archer during this process to help create individualized restructuring programs. However, as archers practice the skill and engage in ongoing dialogue with the consultant, the application of the skill becomes a more automatic process. The following quote, taken from an Olympic archer, provides a contextualized example of the restructuring and the rationalization approach in action once the archer has gained autonomy of the skill. I quote, "Nerves, anxiety, and worry, I can now actually turn them into a positive feeling. If I'm nervous and anxious, I actually become more focused and it gives me a motivation to do it. It becomes a way of helping me. If I'm anxious, I feel focused, and if I'm focused, the nerves are helping me. So I think it is important for me to feel nervous and anxious. I can now turn it into giving me focus, and it helps me to tell me there is a point behind why I am doing it, competing, and why I'm feeling this way." In an attempt to protect archers from negative anxiety interpretations, goal setting and imagery skills can be used as confidence management strategies to help develop positive anxiety interpretations. Dealing with goal setting first, the notion of control, as outlined earlier in this lecture, becomes very, very important. Specifically in sports psychology, there are three main goal types: outcome, performance, and process goals. As all of you know, outcome goals are based upon competitive outcome, that is a match result or position in a competition, and typically involve some level of social comparison. That is, the outcome is directly influenced by the performance of one's opponents. Performance goals are usually numerical and specify some form of absolute or self-reference value. Example, an arrow closer to the center in a shoot-off match. Process goals focus on the demonstration of a certain behavior, skill, or strategy that relates to the task, that is maintaining a proper follow-through in recurve archery. Archers maintain a greater degree of control over process and performance goals than outcome goals. The implication for this in relation to achieving a positive interpretation of anxiety is that when archers maintain greater levels of control over a situation, they are more likely to interpret the anxiety symptoms as positive towards performance. Therefore, mind coaching experts working towards positive anxiety interpretations should consider setting performance and process goal types as a protection mechanism. However, caution is advised here in relation to the idea that setting outcome goals is always a detrimental strategy for elite archers. Although perceived controllability over outcome goals can be an issue, and unrealistic outcome goals can actually create anxiety for archers, The powerful motivational properties of outcome goals cannot be ignored. Therefore, archers should set out the three types of goals, but place a greater degree of importance on performance and process goals as the competitive event becomes more imminent. Mental imagery is the second psychological skill that archers can use as a confidence management strategy to protect against negative interpretations of competitive archery and competitive anxiety. The functional classifications of imagery that have been most closely associated with attaining positive interpretations include archers imagining the mastery of performance related plans, that is, tactical plans being executed correctly. Imagining the mastery of specific skills related to the archer's role in competitive situation. Example, precision shooting skills in a shoot-off. And imagining successfully managing the emotions that accompany competitive archery. That is, imaging completion of a pre-shot routine that enables archers to control the emotions and interpret anxiety symptoms as beneficial. As imagery is a notoriously difficult skill for archers to master, sports psychologists usually work on performers' imagery skills using non-threatening scenarios before using imagery as a skill to restructure anxiety symptoms. The impact of any imagery intervention is partially dependent on the quality of the image the archer can create with respect to submodalities of information. In this context, submodalities of information refers to the visual quality of the image, that is the color and real-time movement. The auditory quality of the image, that is realistic crowd and background noise. Kinesthetic properties of the image, that is associating the image with a feeling of real movements. And the perspective, that is an internal perspective of the viewing through image through one's own eyes, or an external perspective as a viewing the image through a camera from which archers view the image. Specifically, the greater the control and vividness archers possess over integrating these submodalities of information into the imagery drills, that is, making the images as lifelike possible, the greater the impact the intervention has over the intended target. Hence, archers could be asked to visualize a visit to shops where the goals of the practice session would be to increase the visual quality of the images with a focus on seeing the images through an internal perspective with bright, vivid colors and movement that reflects the real-time action of the scene. Once archers have demonstrated a level of proficiency with the skill, mind coaches target the imagery intervention towards maintaining confidence and creating a protection mechanism over negative anxiety interpretations. Initially, the mind coaches and archers produce a series of imagery scripts and audio tracks for the archers to use to hone their imagery skills. For example, if the crux of the imagery routine that archers require is a focus on images depicting mastery of certain management of competitive stress and elite archery skills within the sport, the mental trainers ask the archers to A, record the key skills for the role in their archery. For example, understanding timing of archer's hold, recount recent good performances of these skills, possibly making use of video, and C, include as much information as possible to create a vivid image. The mind coaches and archers use this information to develop a series of imagery routines the archers can use to create images depicting mastery of skills. The input of archers into this process and the use of their knowledge base of archery is a critical factor in creating tangible, individualized imagery routines that have relevance to the elite archers. Scripts and recordings made one-to-one work with a mind coach underpins this work until the archers become proficient at creating these images without the need for such tools. Mind coaches use diary methods, checklists, and validated measures of imagery ability to consistently evaluate the archer's progression with the learning of this skill. Once proficient at creating archery images in non-threatening situations away from the competitive arena, the archers integrate the use of the skill into progressively increasing stressful environments within archery, that is training practice, matches, main events, etc., to gain full control over the skill in intense, pressurized competitive settings. A summary of the psychological skills presented under the umbrella of restructuring approach is one that advocates combining various techniques into an integrated framework. Creating individualized psychological skill programs that are designed to meet the specific needs of the archer is recommended. The important distinctions of these programs over those that attempt to solely manage the level of anxiety is the creation of an appraisal process whereby archers gain control over themselves, the situation, and the anxiety symptoms that they experience in stressful environments. This approach also enables mind coaches to take into account the specific activation demands of the tasks and the events in which elite archers compete. A final caveat to the restructuring approach is that, to date, research has indicated that it is the more elite archers who may gain the most out of such an approach, whereas for lower level archers, programs based on relaxation may be more suitable in the first instance. It appears, therefore, that the more advanced psychological skills used within the restructuring approach are more suited to elite level archers. Whichever approach is used, a suitably trained mind coach should design and deliver the content of the program, at least until archers become proficient with the skills they are developing. Now, let's discuss two case studies. I will now present two case studies to demonstrate approaches for treating competitive anxiety symptoms that archers can experience. The reason for outlining two case studies is that although the restructuring approach provides a contemporary and complete treatment program for archers, there are situations where the reduction approach is highly applicable. The decision of whether the mind coach uses the reduction approach or the restructuring approach should be based specifically on the activation levels required for optimal performance in archery and the individual characteristics of the archer. The two case studies presented now here illustrate this point by featuring scenarios that feature Guru Prakash, an elite archer in the sport of compound archery, and the Kanchana, an archer in the sport of Olympic recurve archery. Now let's start with the first case study. Guru, the compound shooter. Guru is a 28-year-old compound shooter who has been competing in his event for over 9 years at a very high standard. He spent 4 years doing recurve archery and then moved on to compound. Reason for consulting me. He consulted me as a compound shooter. Guru had indicated to me that he was having problems dealing with negative and distracting thoughts while preparing to shoot, and that he was experiencing high levels of physical tension in the release arm and shoulder prior to execution of every shot. He indicated to me that he was feeling anxious prior to his events and his performances were below par, and that he did not remember thinking or feeling this way when performing at his very best earlier. His background. Following this discussion between Guru and me, a consensus was reached that Guru would spend some time working with me to resolve the issue. In response to his concern, I asked Guru to complete a series of validated questionnaires assessing his levels of anxiety, and asked Guru to keep a diary of his thoughts and feelings prior to several important competitions. Guru also sat down with me and discussed these issues in a one-to-one consultation. After triangulating this information, I established that Guru had high levels of both mental and physical anxieties prior to performance and between shots on the archery range. Professional assessment Given that the appropriate activation state that demonstrates a readiness to perform in archery requires low levels of both mental and physical symptoms, I advocated an intervention program that followed the reduction approach to the treatment of competitive anxiety symptoms. As Guru indicated, there is level of negative thoughts, there is cognitive anxiety, and negative feeling, there is somatic anxiety, were impairing his performance. And the evaluation indicated that both of these responses were very high. The intervention targeted the reduction of both mental and physical anxiety symptoms. What was the intervention? All right, let's see. Guru was provided with an intervention program based on both mental and physical skills designed to reduce the levels of symptoms that he experienced. As such, he was provided with a progressive muscle relaxation program to treat his physical anxieties, and was given a transcendental meditation program to combat his mental anxieties. As Guru had indicated, his symptoms were distracting him both prior to his and during his performance, that is between shots. Both programs were designed as full progressive techniques in order for Guru to be able to use them before competing and between shots on the archery range. Now, what was the outcome? Following the successful learning and application of the physical and mental relaxation programs prescribed by me, a process that spanned approximately 14 weeks, I think, Guru indicated that he was able to effectively control his physical symptoms during competitive shooting performance. However, although the transcendental meditation program was having some success at reducing his mental anxieties, Guru still felt that this was a slight distraction to him. Following this concern, I advocated the use of a calming imagery technique. Following a further 5 weeks of training and learning this additional skill, Guru indicated to me that he felt comfortable and able to regulate the levels of mental anxiety he experienced before and during shooting performances in competitions. Now let's see case study number 2. Kanchana, the recurve archer. Kanchana is a 22-year-old full-time recurve archer who has been doing archery for the last 5 years. She has competed in an event for 5 years at the elite level and represented India at 2 indoor World Cups. Although she recently achieved a high score equal to top Olympic archers in India during many a trials, her score and performance recently did not satisfy her or my expectations. What is the reason for her consulting me? As a competitive recurve archer, Kanchana had indicated to me that prior to the recent trials, university trials, and indeed during the warm-up short distance shooting, in the trials, she was having problems dealing with distracting negative thoughts and high levels of muscle tension when in the shooting line preparing to shoot. Kanchana suggested that she was conscious of these mental and physical symptoms prior to the competition, and she felt she was having a negative impact on her pre-trial preparations. She indicated that although she had experienced such symptoms all the way throughout her archery career, it was only recently that she felt unable to control these symptoms' impact on her and how they were likely to affect her future performance. Now, what happened to the professional assessment that I made? Following this discussion, I and Kanchana agreed that we should put in place a program of work to alleviate the concerns Kanchana had expressed. Therefore, I asked Kanchana to complete a series of, again, validated questionnaires assessing her pre-shooting anxiety levels and whether she viewed experiencing these symptoms as positive or negative toward her impending performance. I concluded information pertaining to how Kanchana was interpreting her anxiety-related symptoms due to the fact she had talked about a lack of control over how she thought the anxiety symptoms were likely to affect her future performance. I also consulted with Kanchana using an individual one-to-one approach to gain an understanding of her anxiety responses. Following this, I established that Kanjana's level of pre-event anxiety were high, and she interpreted these symptoms as having a detrimental effect on her performance. Given that 70 meters recurve shooting is a straining event that requires a high degree of focus and muscle power, as well as controlled shooting, the appropriate activation state for Kanjana that demonstrates a readiness to perform is one where she experiences a relatively high level of controlled physical and mental symptoms. In this instance, I advocated a treatment program that adhered to the principles of the restructuring approach. Prescribing techniques that only reduced Kanjana's symptoms could have had a detrimental effect on her performance, as she could have become too mentally and physically relaxed for the activation demands of this event, which at Olympic level typically lasts between 2 to 3 minutes per end of 6 hours. Intervention program. What was the intervention program? Kanjana was provided with an intervention program based on restructuring the interpretation, negative to positive, of both the mental and physical anxieties. The main message of this program was to restructure Kanjana's anxiety interpretations to one where she viewed her mental symptoms as indicators of the importance of the event, and her physical ones as indicators of a physical readiness to perform. I also provided some confidence maintenance techniques, that is, goal setting and mental imagery designed to protect against potential negative interpretation of anxiety-related problems and any subsequent detrimental performance effects from the anxiety symptoms Kanjana experienced. As such, over time, Kanjana was tracked through the restructuring program outlined in this lecture. This process educated Kanjana to view her symptoms as a positive consequence for performance, removing the negative effects of anxiety on her shooting preparation. What was the outcome? Following intensive intervention program over, a 10-week period, the treatment resulted in an interpretation of Kanjana's anxiety from negative to positive without reducing the level of anxiety symptoms, an indication of Kanjana attaining an appropriate activation state prior to competing. Indeed, following the intervention, Kanjana reported that she felt that her mental and physical symptoms were indicators of the importance of the event, how much effort she was prepared to invest in it, and how the symptoms could actually improve performance. Well, so much for stress management in archery in 6 parts. That has been a really long lecture. Now let me very quickly revise section number 1. In the opening section, I clarified and placed into context the key terms used within this area and outlined their importance for applied practical work. In section number 2, in this section, I provided an overview of the stressors, that is, demands that archers commonly encounter, and illustrated the types of anxiety responses archers may experience following exposure to these demands. In section number 3, in the third section of this lecture, I summarized contemporary thinking on how sports psychologists and mind trainers believe anxiety can affect archery performance, and also illustrated how practitioners may attempt to evaluate the archer before sports psychology came in, recommending an intervention strategy. In section number 4, in this section, I provided an overview of stress management interventions in elite archery that have been designed to reduce the intensity of anxiety symptoms that archers commonly encounter in stressful situations. In section number 5th section, I detailed an approach to combating stress that focuses on programs that are designed to restructuring the archer's interpretations of archery symptoms from negative to positive. In the final 6th section, the concluding section, I highlighted the treatment approaches with 2 case study scenarios, Guru and the Kanjana. Well, that brings to an end the 7th lecture in the mental training series. More to come on the mind, about the mind. The Olympic gold in archery. Nothing but the Olympic gold. Manage stress and win over your mind. Remove the stumbling blocks in winning an Olympic medal. The job starts today. Your job starts right now. Till I provoke your mind again, it's a good luck from me. Jai Hind. Om, Om, Om. Olympic medal, nothing but the Olympic medal. Bye-bye. This is Hu from Kusauli Ramada in Himachal Pradesh.